This is the Speaking of Writers podcast. I'm Steve Richards. The book is Midnight Black, a Gray Man novel. The author, Mark Greaney, the number one New York Times best-selling author, back with his next high-octane Gray Man thriller, which again demonstrates why he is currently one of the most widely respected thriller writers working today. With his lover imprisoned in a Russian gulag, the Gray Man will stop at nothing to free her in this latest entry of the beloved series. Mark Greaney has a degree in international relations and political science. In his research for the Gray Man novels, including Sierra 6, Relentless, 1 Minute Out, Mission Critical, Agent in Place, Gunmetal Gray, Backblast, Deadeye, Ballistic, so many now, Mark, On Target, and The Gray Man. He traveled to more than 35 countries and trained alongside military and law enforcement in the use of firearms, battlefield medicine, and close range combative tactics. With Marine Lieutenant Colonel Rip Rawlings, he wrote the New York Times bestseller Red Medal. He is also the author of the New York Times bestsellers Tom Clancy Support and Defend, Tom Clancy Full Force and Effect, Tom Clancy Commander in Chief, and Tom Clancy True Faith and Allegiance with Tom Clancy. He co authored Locked On, Threat Vector, and Command Authority. Happy to have Mark Greaney join me here on Speaking of Writers. Welcome to this program.
Thanks for having me, Steve. Appreciate it.
So, this is the 14th installment in the Gray Man series, Mark. Tell us a little bit about this book and the idea behind it.
Yeah, even though it's the 14th book, they're all standalone novels, so you don't have to read them in any order or read all of them to know what's going on. But here we are in the 14th book, and the hero of the series is a guy named Court Gentry. He's a former CIA paramilitary officer. And now he is madly in love with a woman who's a former SVR, which is Russian Foreign Intelligence Service officer. And she has been arrested by the Russians and put in a prison, part of their gulag system, a prison built in 1931, and actually a real prison. And Court is sort of the only person in the West on the side of right who believes that Zoya is still alive. And he decides that even though he can't really get the help or the support that he needs, he's got to get into Russia, figure out where she is in the largest country of the world, and get her out of there. So he teams up with some interesting Confederates, some Cold War era men and women in their 70s and 80s who were resistance fighters in the Soviet Union, and some very young kind of partisan rebels inside Moscow. And together they try and go get Zoya, while at the same time the FSB has a kind of a cunning plan to lure the Gray Man directly into a trap. So it's a big old timey Cold War era type novel with a lot of kind of fresh action placed in it.
Let's talk about the Gray Man. And for those new to this series, it's an interesting little story behind you and creating and the idea for the Gray Man. If you could tell that, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I first I developed him over desperation. I'd been sort of turned down by some publishers for some things that I'd written, and I needed something fresh. And roughly that time, I was working a full-time job, but I'd gone to Guatemala for a few months to study Spanish as part of my job. And when I was there, I was down in El Salvador, and I just saw an American guy who was in a bar, just having a beer, and I just made up this whole backstory about the guy. I never met him, talked to him, or anything, but he just looked like a tough customer. And I just made up this story that he's former agency guy, and the agency's after him for some reason. Maybe he doesn't even know why. And he's working in the third world, kind of as a gun for hire type of situation. So I just came up with this whole story, and then decided to try and write about him. And The Gray Man, which is my first published novel, is actually the second book I wrote about this guy. So I had a bunch of false starts along the way.
Hmm. What's the story behind you becoming a writer?
The story is I never read a single novel until I was almost 20 years old. I read a ton of nonfiction. I had subscriptions to The Economist and US News and all these publications when I was a teenager. It was just what I was very interested in. But I picked up a Tom Clancy novel, Patriot Games, and loved it, loved every page. Immediately went and bought Nelson DeMille, Frederick Forsyth, Jean Le Carré, anybody that was a big Cold War era novelist. fell in love with the genre, had an idea that maybe I could try and write something. Spent 15 years writing my first book and finished it in 2005 and wrote another book in 7 or 8 months. And after that, I just really got the bug for writing. So I didn't know if I'd ever be published, but I knew that I liked to do it. And so it took me 20 years from when I first started my first book to when, I had my first book signing, I guess. But it was 20 years of kind of developing the craft.
And the Clancy series. How did you get selected to write that series?
I had the same editor as Tom Clancy. So when Tom was looking for a co-author back in 2011, they asked me if I would be interested. And I actually tried out for it. They didn't ask me to try out. I said, yes, I'd be interested, but I think a lot of people were interested. And there was kind of this lull from when they first asked me and nothing was going on. So I just wrote. I just wanted to prove to them that I knew all the characters and sort of knew not how Clancy wrote. I never tried to write like Tom Clancy, but, just to show that I could tell sort of a contemporary geopolitical story. So I wrote like a 50-page sample of something that might be in a Tom Clancy type novel. And then they had me go out to Baltimore to meet Tom. And we wrote 3 books together. And then he passed away, unfortunately.
What was he like?
Well, he was great. It's funny. I'd heard so many stories about how he could be kind of like curmudgeony, and I still hear those stories. I'll be at book signings all the time, and somebody will come up and they'll say like, "Oh, I met Tom Clancy," and I'm like, "This is going to go one or two ways." And so he could be kind of curmudgeony, but with me, we got along really great. I got along great with his wife, and I was just so lucky to have that opportunity. And then his family asked me to continue this series after he passed away. So I ended up doing 7 Jack Ryan books in a 6-year period.
I mentioned this in the introduction. You've traveled to over 30 countries you're an extensive researcher, each novel's location, and to get firsthand experience in firearms training, scuba diving, stunt diving, SWAT training, fighter plane flying, field medical training, and so much more. Why is it important to you to experience similar situations and stunts that your characters are in?
I think first I did it because I thought it was cool and I thought it would look good to say that I'd done some of this stuff because I wasn't a special operator or even in the military. But it actually does really inform the writing and it helps me with the writing. And now as I go deeper and deeper, Midnight Black is my 26th published novel. And you've used everything that you've ever thought up. So you have to go out and get new fodder and new information. So this year I'm going to go to Northern Ireland. I've never been there before to do research on a book, and I'm going to take some more medical courses. I want to incorporate that a little bit better into the story. So I'm always looking to garner new information. 90% of it you get from reading or from, talking to somebody, but that 10% can be really, really helpful. A lot of the firearms that are used in the books I own or get the opportunity to use in firearm classes in schools around the country, and it really helps make the story feel a lot more credible.
Are you a plotter or a pantser?
I have got to, at some point in my career, give up on saying that I'm both because I'm more of a pantser than a plotter. I would, it just seems like the greatest thing in the world to be able to chart out your book and then go paint by numbers, but I've never been able to pull that off. The book I'm writing right now, which is actually the 15th Gray Man novel, it's by the seat of my pants. I have some things that I want to happen along the way, but that is by no way a plot. And I have a general thing that my villain wants, which is, integral to this type of a story, but that is not really a plot. I am just, writing scenes that I think are good, and hopefully I'll find a way to connect it all together and make a story. I hear people say that they're more plotters, and I hope they're lying because I'm very jealous if they really are able to just work that whole thing out and then go back in and fill it in with words. That sounds great, but I haven't been able to do that.
Do you always know the ending when you start?
I rarely know the ending when I start, other
Mhm.
than maybe there's some aspect where I want it to lead into another story or one character arc. As I said, every book is a standalone, but you
Yep.
want your characters to grow in one way or another, both inside the book and within the longer plot line. But I don't always know. Sometimes I know, like, the bad guy will get his comeuppance, or the nuclear war will be averted, or some other trite thing like that. But I don't know how it's going to happen now.
Have you ever gone back to some of the earlier books in the series and reread them?
Reread them? No, I have listened to some audio of earlier books because I'm looking for something. Some authors have like this, just a Bible of all their characters. It's like this is his mom's name and this is the town that, this happened in. And I have never really done that. And my excuse is, and I don't think it's a bad excuse, is that I've written 26 books in 15 years and I'm always deep into the next book. There's never this, people think that, you have time to just go back and read all your other books. And I'm writing, 1,200 words a day if I can hit it. And there's not much time to do that. But I do know that, like, okay, I have to remember how old this guy said his daughter was 3 books ago.
Hmm.
And I know about where I said it in the book, and that's as scientific as I get. I just kind of go to the audio book, kind of go around that area where I think it is, and just I'll be working out or walking my dog, and I'm just waiting to get that snippet of information.
Speaking of the audiobooks, I recently saw you give a talk at the Savannah Book Festival in Savannah, Georgia. Great book festival, great talk. And someone in the audience asked you about the audiobooks and the narrator of this series specifically and how much they enjoyed that person. And you'd mentioned that you actually picked this person out, right?
I did. Yeah, yeah. They only gave me 2 people to listen to, Audible, the book company. It was very early in my career, and actually the first Gray Man novel came out, and there was no audio with that. We just didn't get a deal for that, and I think the second as well. And around the time of the third book, we got an offer, a small offer, and so it wasn't like a big release where I could just pick whichever narrator I wanted. They're like, here's a couple of guys we'd like you to listen to. And one of them was Jay Snyder, and I really liked him. I like the other guy too, to be perfectly honest. I just barely liked this one, maybe a little bit more. And he's been with me for all 14 books so far.
What's the best thing about being an author?
The best thing is, when things are working, when you're sitting there and you're writing as fast as your fingers will move. I think that's really good. The other best thing is the access to really interesting people, and I don't mean other writers, not that they're not interesting, but I just mean, a 19-year-old female who works on a destroyer, and is just interesting to talk to, or whatever, a 90-year-old who was at the Omaha Beach, things of that nature, and you get to meet these people along in your career. And uh, it's so lucky. I mean, I worked in the restaurant business until I was 30, and I worked in sales and marketing until I was 40, and didn't get published till I was 42. So I feel very, very fortunate that I get to have these experiences.
And what would you like readers to take away from Midnight Black?
Well, I always want readers to take away enjoyment of the book. It's a geopolitical novel. It has a lot of sort of accurate depictions of things that are going on in the world that I think are very important, and I like to talk about those things because I'm interested in them. But I'm not trying to hit anybody over the head with my political views or anything like that. I just want people to enjoy it, and it's a story about individuals. They're characters you can get behind. There's villains that you can hate, but also sort of understand why they are the way they are. You know, with the backstory and whatnot. So I really, it's the human condition and the emotions in the story is what's most important, and not the geopolitics. So I really want people to walk away with it, just having had a really good time reading or listening to the book.
And it's got a great book jacket. Look at how it pops there in the background.
I see it. Yeah.
Yeah. And the Washington Post called you the Tom Cruise of thriller writers, although you don't do your own stunts, at least not yet, right?
Yeah, I think they're just sort of referring to the Washington Post came down to Memphis to watch me, in a day, and we went to a gun range down in Holly Springs, Mississippi, and I got some training that I get from time to time, and I think they're just referring to the fact that I do a bunch of things to make the books, sort of accurate and feel more credible, and I guess that's what they were talking about. They never told me.
Well, he's working on the 15th. The 14th is out now, Midnight Black. You can get more markgraineybooks.com. You can connect online for more information. But Midnight Black is out now. Mark, thank you so much for joining me.
You bet. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you. And this is the Speaking of Writers podcast. And hit the subscribe button. And by the way, if your independent bookstore does not carry this, ask them to order it. I'm Steve Richards.